This is an Assassin's Creed hidden blade. This is just a replica from the game. Unfortunately, this one's button activated, and it's made of plastic. In this video, I'm going to make a real one out of metal that's also ring activated. So to start, I found a cool hidden blade design online and 3D printed it. I'll explain how it works later. But the first steps was remaking all these pieces out of steel. So I grabbed a sheet of metal and started tracing out the components. Once I had most of them marked, it was time to start cutting. Out came the grinder, sparks were flying everywhere, and that's when things went downhill fast. It was already a hot day, and for some weird reason my stomach was feeling the heat the most. That's when I realised I had set myself on fire. Yeah, not exactly a good omen for the rest of this project. After a quick emergency trip to the shops, I came back with a brand new apron. Now I really look like I did a thing. With that sorted, I then cut out the rest of the pieces, and it was time to move on to refining the shape and squaring up all the edges. This part was simple, just sand away any excess metal. Honestly, it was the only easy step in this entire build. I didn't realize it at the time, but this project was going to become the hardest I've ever attempted. Looking back, this is the only part that actually went to plan, and that's saying something considering I set myself on fire. Anyway, with all the pieces cut out, this is how it was going to look when it's all put together, which was easier said than done. Speaking of putting it together, let me explain how the hidden blade actually works. So here we have a stopper. There are two of them, one at each end, along with two activation plates. The stoppers are being held in place by bits of rubber. That's keeping the tension and stopping them from just folding in. The activation plates are being held together with an elastic band. This could be switched out for a spring to make it stronger, or just stronger elastic bands. When the lever is moved, the activation plate will send the blade out. Up the other end, the same thing will work, but to send the blade back in. You might be thinking, oh, it's not working properly, but that's because I had to remove one thing so you could actually see it. When all the pieces are together, it does actually work. Now for the full moving parts, I probably could make them, but I'd do a horrible job. So instead, I'm going to order them, and that's where today's sponsor comes in. This video is sponsored by PCBWay. PCBWay is a company that is perfect for your next project, whether it be CNC machining, metal sheet laser cutting, 3D printing, or mold injections. It's as simple as dragging and dropping your file, selecting the material you want it to be made out of, and how many you need. I'm making mine out of steel. For somebody who has a 3D printer, it's awesome to be able to order stuff that I can't print, such as different metals. And only a few days after ordering, I had my stuff, and I was ready to continue the build. I wasn't happy with how some of the corners on the inside were looking, so I grabbed out the jigsaw and started cleaning them up. The first cut went perfect, the second one not so much. I managed to burn myself again. Thankfully, no fire this time. But I did also manage to bend the metal in the process. Luckily, once it had cooled down, it was a quick fix. I just bent it back into shape over the table. Anyway, I kept tweaking each metal piece until they were all perfect. Well, as close to perfect as I could get. And then I realized something. The activation plates I had ordered earlier were a little bit too tall. They stuck over the top of the walls, which meant it wouldn't fit when the lid was on. So to fix this, I just had to make the walls a little bit taller. So I went and grabbed the spare piece of metal left over from when I built samurai armor and cut out 4 more pieces to raise the height just enough. Once the pieces were cut out, I also sanded them down to match perfectly with the existing walls. With all the pieces cut and shaped, there was just one last step to do before assembly, and that was cut an L shape into both ends of one section of the wall. These notches is where the spring and stoppers will sit to help activate the blade's movement. Now, cutting a shape like this isn't easy, especially when you don't have the right tools, but with a mixture of a grinder and my drill press, I made it work. And honestly, I think I did a pretty good job. With that done, we can now assemble all of the wall pieces before connecting it to the base, starting with the biggest piece. Normally, you'd just weld metal pieces together, but since I don't have a welder, I had to improvise. Instead, I'm going to be using metal pegs. I clamped all the wall pieces together and then drilled 3 holes going through every piece. I slid in the pegs, I'm going to be using this wire, and then I bent them so then they couldn't fall out. I trimmed down the excess metal and hammered it flat on the ground. The pressure from me hammering it is going to expand the pegs just a little bit, stopping them from sliding and moving. By doing this, it's just going to hold the metal together securely, and the only way to get it undone is to drill the pegs out. Once that side was done, I repeated the same process on the other wall pieces. On this wall, you can see the L shape that I cut is partially blocked just in the right spot. This is perfect for holding a spring securely in place. But I did notice the pegs were sticking out the ends a little bit too much, so I brought the grinder back out and quickly flattened them off. While I was at it, I also cleaned up the sharp edges so nothing would catch or get snagged on it later. This is the base, and eventually this is the part that's going to sit on my arm, and I'm going to need a way to attach it to my arm. So I cut these holes in all of the loops. It's not perfect, but it'll do the job. With that sorted, I can actually start attaching things to the base. And the first thing I got to attach is this rod. I'm going to do this the same way I connected the pieces earlier. But this part has to be exact, so I double and triple checked the alignments before hammering it in. But as I was lining everything up, I realized a problem. And that was a problem with the walls. Remember that part I said was perfect earlier? Yeah, it wasn't. The springs didn't fit at all. I needed to make the gap bigger. So first, I thought I could just sand the pegs away, take the whole wall apart, cut away what I need and reassemble it. But sanding the pegs away didn't work. Then I thought maybe I could just squish the springs with a hammer. Instead of changing the shape of the spring, it just completely flattened it. This spring here fit perfectly, however it went the wrong way, so I tried to change its direction, but that also didn't work. So I went and got my Dremel out and started grinding it away. Now this technically did work, but it was going to take way too long. As I was doing it, I realized that the spring from a pen fit perfectly. So with that little side problem done, we can go back to connecting the rod to the base. The best way to line everything up for that is to connect the walls to the base first, using nuts and bolts. The reason I went with nuts and bolts is so then if I mess something up, I can always detach the walls and restart the base. Anyway, back to connecting the rod to the base. Since everything was lined up, I just clamped it down, drilled in the holes, and did the same method from earlier. And it worked great. With all the stationary parts finished, it was finally time to start on the moving mechanism, the parts that would actually make the thing work. The first step was adding the stoppers. That part was simple enough, just drill 2 holes, one at each end, for them to drop into place. One part that I didn't show earlier was the plate that moves the stoppers. The way it works is when you slide the plate, it flicks the stoppers in. So all I had to do was trace a 3D printed one, cut it out, and make sure it was smooth so it could slide with no issues. I also realized I hadn't made a lid for the hidden blade yet, so I added a lid. This is pretty much how the whole thing's going to look at the end. The lid needed to have a circle cut out in the middle, so later on you can move the plate at the pull of a string. Cutting that circle took some time, but eventually I got it done and the lid was ready. The moving plate itself also needed to have a hole, but instead of a circle it was just going to be a line. To test to see if everything actually worked, I just had to cut a small slit into the blade. This slit is where the stoppers would fold and lock into place, and for the first time the mechanism kind of worked. But there was a problem. I couldn't get it to function properly with the plate, which is the most important part. I tried swapping the plate for a thinner piece of metal, and then I even tried the 3D printed version, but with no luck. It wasn't until I ditched the spring and switched it out for some rubber bands. That's when it started to work. I just needed one thing, and that was stronger bands. I also thought making the blade thinner wouldn't hurt, but even with stronger elastics and a thinner blade, it still just didn't run smoothly. At this point I was quite stuck. I spent hours and hours on it and I couldn't figure it out, so I decided to move on to a part I actually knew how to build, and I would come back to it later. This little doodad was the key to making the plate move. It sits in the hole, the rope is attached to it, and when it's pulled, it rotates, which in turn will shift the plate to either activate or deactivate the stoppers. It's also the piece that lines up with the circle in the lid that we drilled earlier. To protect it, I want to build a small case. It's going to have 3 walls and 1 open front. So I cut 3 rods and then put 2 holes in each of them. I lined them up on the lid and connected it. For the metal roof, I'm just going to use a thin piece of metal. At the time, I didn't think much of it, so I attached the roof permanently. That'd come back to bite me later, but I wouldn't realize it until it was too late. With that in place, you can see the circular part moving perfectly. Oh, by the way, I'm going to go with the 3D printed plate because the metal one was too heavy. Unfortunately, I still had to figure out the mechanism, but you could at least see how it's going to work tied to a ring. That was until I snapped it. There was only one thing left to do. Actually make the hidden blade function. Turns out that is the hardest part of this whole build. For days I kept trying new things, and every attempt seemed like it was taking me further and further away from making it work. No matter what I did, nothing changed. It felt like I had tried everything. I just couldn't make it work, and I was ready to call it quits. But after coming this far, I decided, you know what, I'm going to give myself one more day to figure this out. So let's talk about what was working. The blade would sometimes shoot out, but only when I pushed it with my thumb, not by the pull of a string. And even when it did work, nothing was stopping the blade from just sliding at the end and hitting the floor. On top of that, the sliding plate was way too thin, and the circle part kept sliding underneath the lid. I also ripped off the roof of the little case, so I'm going to have to put that back on top. And that's what we're going to start with. This time I'm going to use nuts and bolts so I can remove the roof whenever I need. But I can't have the bolt heads sticking out the end because otherwise it will interfere with the blade motion. I drilled out a little recess in the lid, so then the bolts can sit flush. With that out the way, we could move on. Next up was the sliding plate problem. This was a really easy fix. By simply adding the thin bit of metal from earlier underneath, it made it just thick enough to keep it in place. Since the piece of metal was the same shape as the 3D printed piece, I didn't even need to attach them. They would just sit perfectly on top of each other. That left 2 things, the mechanism and the blade not stopping. So to stop the blade, there are 2 steps to fix it. The first step was to cut an extra slit for the stopper to slide into. When the stopper catches it, it stops the blade from sliding back inside the case. However, it can still go forward and come completely out. So the final little modification was to add a small rectangular piece to the top of the blade. I cut a little bit of metal out and started attaching it. I made sure to sand away any bit of metal sticking out and also make sure the extra bit of metal was smooth. But then I realized I didn't need all of it and I could cut back to just have a tiny bit stick over the edge. And after that, the blade locked into place. With that solved, there was just one thing left, and that was making the mechanism reliable and hopefully ring activated. After a lot of deliberation, I decided to ditch the rotating circle entirely. That means the best I could do was make the blade shoot out, and it won't be double action. That means it won't be able to retract back inside the case. Even with that compromise, I still had hours of trial and error ahead of me. I tried every combination I could think of, different types of elastic bands, stacking more than one of them, switching back to springs, even dousing the whole thing in oil. Nothing seemed to make it work, until I finally, after days of tweaking, something just clicked, and honestly I have no idea what fixed it. But it worked, and I'm not complaining. From there, I just had to put it all together. For good luck, I burned myself one more time, did some final sanding, tightened all the bolts, and added 2 straps so I could attach it to my arm. And with that, I called it good. After weeks of work, the hidden blade finally worked. It didn't always fully extend, but most of the time it did. And the sound it makes was perfect, just like from the game. The locking mechanism works perfectly. The blade will stay inside until you need to use it, and as soon as you activate it, it will stay locked out. So far, I haven't had any misfires. The only massive downside is I could have made the straps a bit better. But the real test now was how well does it actually cut. I got 2 things to test it on, apples and cans of Coke. To start was the apple. Stabbing it was a bit of a challenge at first because if I stabbed it at the wrong angle, the apple would just go flying off. But when I did hit it at the right angle, it went into the apple with no effort. Once I tested it thoroughly for shits and giggles, I thought I'd throw the apple in the air and try and catch it on the end of the blade. After 3 attempts, I got it. Here's the apple after all the testing. As you can see, there are deep cuts going through the apple. Obviously, the apple didn't explode like in previous projects. The hidden blade was meant to be a discreet weapon, and that's exactly what it did on this apple. It left a little hole going deep into the apple. Anyway, moving on to the cans of Coke. To no one's surprise, I got completely covered in it. The hidden blade easily cut through the can. I had one more can, so I thought I'd set it up and try again, and hopefully this time it doesn't spray right into my eyes. And surprisingly, it didn't. It still cut through the can easily, the can just shot off in a different direction. After all that, I was completely soaked, but I was also stoked that the blade actually worked. It was great to see that both the mechanism and the sharp pointy end worked. If you guys enjoyed the video, like and subscribe. I'm trying to hit 10,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and if you guys want to see more behind the scenes content, you can follow me on Patreon. Now the blade isn't perfect. Unfortunately, I couldn't make it retract. In the future, I might come back and visit this project, and if I do, I'll definitely make it retract back into the case. Anyway, what do you guys think about the project? Let me know in the comments, and if you guys have any ideas of other things I should make, let me know as well. And thanks for watching.